Now they say mind the business that pays you. Well, if you buy things, if you manage a budget, if you're trying to make sense of where your money is going, then tariffs are your business. When there are tariffs, you are affected.
Yeah.
Period. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Julian. And today we are finally talking about tariffs. I've been trying to avoid this conversation. I felt like everybody in the world, literally, was talking about tariffs. But we're going to put a little bit of a twist on it. This is not an explainer on what they are. There's been plenty of that. This is more so like what to do about it, how to think about it on a broader perspective, not just your personal finances. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to Nwakego. Sent us an email not too long ago. This is shortly after reading Cashing Out. Here's what it said. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Saunders. Formal straight out the gate. I appreciate it. I wanted to simply say thank you for writing your book. Cashing Out resonated with me. I could visualize the words about the chapters referencing family, finding your circle, being open to the process. I would get so excited about the thought of financial freedom that I would want to share it with everyone. My husband would give me a look and explain I was not reading the room. Thank you again for your persistence to complete the process. I know that feeling so well. We talk about that in our book.
Oh my God.
I don't go through that nearly as much
Yes,
as
you
I
do.
used to. Not as much as I used to.
You're not in as many rooms as you used to be.
Well, that might be it. That might be it. But anyway, we appreciate that. And shout out to the whole family over there. I'm not sure, normally the username, well, it wasn't the email, that's what it is. I was going to say the username might give you a little bit of a hint as to where they live. But for now, I would just guess that they are somewhere in the United States. East Coast.
That's real.
East Coast. How about that? All right. Tariffs. Yeah. Look, unless you've been living under a rock, this is and has been one of the biggest topics of conversation. It is all over the news, especially as it relates to the United States and China. There is a literal trade war, a literal of tariff war, tit for tat. I'm going to tax you. I'm going to tax you back. The last I heard, Trump slapped, something crazy. It was like over 100%.
I know.
Tariff.
And threatening 200%.
Yeah, it was like
250%.
It was just literally, if you do this, I'll do that. I've seen threats, 200, 245. And then it was like, oh, well, we'll pull it back and it'll come down.
We'll pause it for 90 days.
We're going to pause it. It's just all over the board. It is dominating the news. It's leading to a lot of people to panic buy, panic sell. It's affecting the stock market. And again, that's why we're not just going to talk about it from the standpoint of personal finance and how to deal with some of these price fluctuations, but also from a standpoint of just understanding like how all of this stuff works to help shape your decisions, whether it's as an investor, as a consumer. At the end of the day, we're really going to connect the dots, given this is the very end of Financial Literacy Month, which is every year in the month of April. So we're going to talk a little bit more about price literacy as well. Yeah. We don't talk nearly enough about that. Not just around like how it affects prices, but like how it shapes pretty much everything, how prices are determined and how to think about them through your own purchasing and or investing process. So tariffs, big conversation.
I know. I'm going to come in with a hot take and say that if you don't understand how prices are set, then you really don't understand how money moves. Right? When we talk about financial literacy, price literacy is a huge part of that, especially in 2025 when prices lie, shrink, surge, change on a regular basis. Like if you don't understand why you're paying what you're paying for something, then it goes beyond just like a budget issue. It really is a literacy issue. And so I want to start with just talking about unpacking what tariffs are, how they work, why this latest round of back and forth is a little different from previous rounds. And I just want to start with defining what a tariff is. Tariffs are taxes, period. They're not penalties. They're not gestures. They're taxes that are placed on imported goods. And they're paid by the importer, but they're usually passed on to you. So tariffs themselves are not a new strategy. It's not something that Trump invented. Countries have been using them for centuries. I was going to say decades, but it's really centuries to influence trade between each other.
Yep.
But tariffs at this level in the 145, 125% range are extreme.
Yep.
But these are not just mild adjustments. They're signals to say we are not just mad, we're going to make it expensive for you to ignore us.
Yep.
And so although they're being framed as this protective measure, like, oh, we're protecting domestic jobs and industries, the reality is higher prices, slower supply chains, and weird substitutes in your life are going to become the norm if they actually continue or happen.
And one of the things that I notice is anytime this topic of conversation comes up, almost like an automatic trigger, people say, well, that's why we need to do like we used to do and make everything here in the United States and bring back manufacturing. And we used to make stuff. Now we don't
we
make.
Still do.
we used to make stuff. My dad worked at the, such and such factory. And it's true. We used to make stuff. As a country, that was our big sort of competitive advantage in the world. We were at some point an engine, not so much for the world, but for ourselves. That has since changed. And I'm no macroeconomics expert, but I do remember in my early days of graduate school, which was like the late 2000s, I remember reading The Earth is Flat or The Earth. Yeah, I think it's The Earth was Flat by Thomas Friedman. Big book at the time. Like you pretty much were not an MBA if you did not read that book. You had
all the counterintuitive understanding.
You had
of the
to
world.
understand. Like it was basically saying this is what happened once we started shutting down U.S. factories, once outsourcing basically become the soup of the day. The flavor of the day. Like if you want to make money, find cheaper ways to produce products. One of the best ways to do that is to source physical products, gadgets, widgets, whatever from elsewhere. Or in some cases, you can also just have things assembled in or manufactured abroad and import them into the country, which really at that point really wouldn't be an import because you would have your factory somewhere else. But this is all by design. Like where we are is by design. It's not like these factories just up and closed. These were conscious decisions being made by big businesses who were looking to grow and realized that the only way that they could do it was to continue to create products more cheaply. Now, what they did with that was they made really, really cheap and affordable products more available for Americans. So here we are,
we love,
flush with cash. We absolutely love being able to go and get $2 shirts and 50-cent pieces of whatever it is. And we love that stuff, like tchotchkes all day. But now we're mad about it. Right. So we've benefited from it because we as consumers were able to buy things really cheaply and affordably. Those of us who are also invested in these companies were able to benefit from this boom in profitability from companies who were able to be more profitable as a result of making these decisions. And then things changed politically, which is, normal. And so all of that to say, like these tariffs were put in place in some cases to kind of, I don't want to say level the playing field, but it is a way of like warfare. It's a way of saying, you know what, we want some of this stuff back because we've sort of reached a cap. And the only way for us to grow is to create a new division of power and wealth. And tariffs for a lot of countries is a way for them to force that issue, to force companies to bring certain jobs back, to force companies to stop doing XYZ and start doing things that they believe will ultimately lead to being more favorable for everyone involved. But in the interim, we're dealing with what we're dealing with, which is like really, really rocky times, really expensive things all of a sudden. This is part of the cycle. We just happen to be in the uncomfortable part. We'll see what happens, but
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that countries trade for the same reasons that people do. There are countries that have different strengths, different resources, and different priorities. And so part of the problem is that once you offshore manufacturing, it's not as simple as just flipping a switch and bringing it back. At this point, we have lost parts of the supply chain. You can't make a smartphone in one country. There are 300 different parts sourced across 30 different countries. And some components literally don't exist in certain countries.
I'm pretty sure you're guessing with that 300. Like that number is probably like in the thousands.
Oh, I'm like, you think it's lower?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, I think just to be clear, like you're saying that number, but I'm pretty sure it's significantly higher.
Yeah, it's an estimation. But what I'm saying is like, even though the smartphone is put together in China or Singapore or whatever, the parts were sourced from India, from Africa, from all sorts of places around the world. And so what happens is you lose trained workers, you lose a lot of the equipment that's required to either make or mine these parts or pieces. And not for nothing, a lot of people have gotten used to the jobs that they have now and don't want those jobs working in a factory or working those long hours on their feet anymore. So even if we brought them back, there's this question of who's going to do them and how much is it going to cost us?
Yep.
And then that's just like the people side. You got to think about the company side as well, because when companies implement tariffs, they now have to find this backdoor way of doing things. Some will pass the cost on to you. Some will swap the materials or cut corners or shift production or do something just to avoid the tariff. But all of those things are going to affect the quality of that product, the availability, the ingredient mix, if it's like a beauty product, and the price. Like all of those things are going to affect you in some way. And so when countries retaliate, like we're seeing right now, where each side is kind of raising the price or the cost to prove a point, and then we're all caught in the middle and we're paying more for stuff that didn't change in quality, it just changed in politics, it becomes this loop. And the longer it drags on, the more distorted the prices get. You know how they say, mind the business that pays you? Did you ever say that?
I've heard it, but I've never said it.
Well, if you buy things, if you manage a budget, if you're trying to make sense of where your money is going, then tariffs are your business. Tariffs are the business that pay you. Like this isn't a matter of picking a side of Democrats and Republicans or trying to make a political statement. It's like when there are tariffs, you are affected.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. So I want to talk about it from that standpoint. Let's start with talking about consumers, everyday people, and what we feel. Because I think, again, when we start talking about tariffs, it's really around how it affects prices. And that's really where the rub is for a lot of people. And so let's talk about that, because I think most folks have a general understanding of like supply and demand. And we're used to that being the reason why there may be a sudden surge in prices. Like they're not accustomed to all of a sudden something being readily available, but that same thing, whether it's an orange or a car, is significantly more expensive than it was last month or last week. And if it's something that you really rely on, like a commodity, you find yourself in the situation where you know you're overpaying for something and you feel manipulated and you don't really have an understanding of alternatives or what to do or how to even think about this thing. And this is where something really becomes a bit of an issue. So I think the first tip or the first bit of advice that I would recommend people is to actually start with having a better understanding of how much something actually costs. So the cost of it is like the core part of what actually shapes the price, like whatever it costs them. So we talked about the iPhone. I'm just making it up. Let's say an iPhone costs $1,500. I legitimately have no idea how much an iPhone costs. I'm just making that up. It could cost,
about right?
Really? Okay. I was about to say I could be $500 off. I have no idea.
Well, they have ranges now. So the basic one is $500 cheaper. The older ones are $500 cheaper than that. Well, and then the new ones are like $1,500.
I'm talking like MSRP, like not what you think you can get for free if you sign up for a 2-year plan. It's never free. Like that. Well, I know it's never free. But all that to
price
say,
literacy.
We know Apple is profitable because they can make a phone that they charge for, like I said, I'm guessing $1,500. They're not making it for $1,500. They're making it for significantly cheaper than $1,500. Most people don't know that part, right? Like maybe there are a handful of people who are watching Shark Tank and they listen to someone who would mention that, oh, well, it costs us $2 to make this thing and we sell it for $10. And then you see the shark's eyes light up because they realize that there's space, a lot of space, which is called margin, in between what it costs to make something and what they can actually sell. And then they start thinking further than that, saying, oh, wow, well, if we find other ways to improve it or better ways to sell it or distribute those products, then we know we can really start bringing in the money. And the reason why a lot of people don't understand this is because most people didn't study business. Most people don't understand those things. So they don't understand the intricacies of pricing. But I think if you want to get a better grasp on dealing with these things, it helps a lot to get a better understanding of what it actually costs to make things. Once you get that, you'll be much more prone to make a decision around what you're willing to actually continue to purchase, even though the price is considerably higher. Now, I did not intend on doing this, but speaking of Shark Tank, right? I think it was episode 161 with Kim Lewis. I had that point down, but I did not intend on making a Shark Tank reference. Maybe it's because I did intend on bringing up Kim Lewis. We interviewed her on the podcast and she actually published a reel not too long ago, but she was talking about the work that she did as the CEO of Curl Mix. And when she visited China, I think it was like a study abroad program or something, visited the factories and could literally see luxury goods being made right alongside standard goods.
Yeah.
And when you start to see that, when you see it and you realize like the only difference between, I'm just making it up, like a Lululemon, legging and a insert other brand legging. And I'm saying this also as a proud Costco shopper,
Kirkland.
Right? Like Kirkland brand
Kirkland
probably
chic.
is made in the exact same factory
It is.
as these other brands. It looks the same, it feels the same. The only difference is that logo. When you see that, and this was Kim's point, you almost create a bit of an aversion to buying luxury products because you realize, oh my God, why would I pay 200% more willingly? Right? Willingly for this thing. So now take that same level of thinking and think about it with respect to a tariff, right? Why would you pay that much more for something that you know definitively is the same as these other things? You wouldn't. You wouldn't, right? If you actually had a clear understanding of what it would cost. And so I think that really, really helps. I'll give you another example of it is, and we talked about this, I don't remember the podcast episode, but this was around dynamic pricing, which is like how much something costs today versus how much it might cost at 5 p.m. tonight or during a busy holiday. I think we're generally clear on what that means when it comes to products like airfare or a hotel room. We know that in the summer during peak travel is going to be higher, but that same flight, same pretzels, same cookies, same flight attendant will cost you significantly more or less depending on when you actually buy it. But that dynamic pricing, that ability is extending beyond just airfare and hotels. Now it's also happening with products. And it may not be as quick, as deliberate, but they are testing those things right now and they're being quite successful at it. And so there are things that you can do as a consumer to help you be a bit more conscious of whether or not you are just stuck with the price that is being offered to you, or if it's worthy looking for an alternative or just deciding not to buy something at all. So I think just baseline levels of business literacy above and beyond personal finance, above and beyond just budgeting, I think is really, really important. Because whether we're talking about tariffs or price manipulation or dynamic pricing, it doesn't matter. It ultimately boils down to how much are you willing to pay for a product, whether it's a good or a service or both.
Yes. I think when you talk about price literacy, that is my definition. Price literacy is knowing when something is worth it.
Right.
Not just whether you can afford it, but is it priced fairly? That's the difference between reacting to prices and actually reading them, right? When we talk about literacy, it's taking in all of these context clues. Even when you're talking about just reading, we don't say kids can read just because they understand their sight words. We ask them to understand setting, place, plot, character, all of these things that help you understand the full story. It's not enough to just know the words alone, and it's not enough to just know the numbers alone when it comes to prices.
And it's not enough to just read it. You're literally making me think about our son who's like, all right, you read it. Now tell me what happened.
Right.
Who's the main character?
Right.
And what happened? Right. So you're just reading it.
Yeah.
All right. No, read it again.
Right.
Read it again. Actually understand. That's comprehension.
That's comprehension. And that's a huge, huge part of financial literacy because to your point, a lot of people stopped at the basic level of Econ 101 and the marketing jargon. It's not even econ, it's just jargon where people assume that prices rise because things got better.
Yeah.
And that's not true. Prices rise because somebody decided that they could and should.
That's it.
Sometimes it's a tariff, sometimes it's vibes, sometimes it's strategic, like with shrinkflation, which we saw companies do, or dynamic pricing, or tip creep, or fake discounts. Homes, whatever it is.
Same home, same wood, same nails, same carpet or hardwood flooring. You can pick it up and drop it off across the street. Might not be worth the same.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like that's pricing power.
Yes. And we've just gotten used to not questioning prices. And now our habits are being trained by, I'll call them greedy, but greedy companies and power hungry politicians. And so I want to talk a little bit about how to get better at reading prices. And the first tip is to track them. You have to track prices, not for every single item, but for, 5 to 10 things that you buy regularly. You have to track the price of your most used items. And there are tools for this now. Like you don't have to just write it down in a notebook. You don't have to keep receipts in one of them little accordion folders like my mom used to do. You can use tools like Camel, or Keepa, or screenshots of grocery prices And over time, you're going to start to see patterns. You're going to start to understand what's seasonal, what's inflated, what's actually quote unquote on sale versus like, this is just how they get you to buy 10 of them. They're always $1. Like, you know what I mean? So you have to track your prices. And then the second thing that you have to do is call bluff on limited time deals. Like usually it's not a limited time deal. Usually it's going to be back on that deal, in another week or two. The other thing I would say is before you buy in store, check online. I just had this experience in Macy's and I was blown away at how much cheaper the same item was if I ordered it online and picked it up in store versus if I was shopping in store and bought it in store. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, Macy's has a price match policy, which I learned about through a conversation with customer service. But that's the other thing I would add to that point is to make sure that you shop somewhere that has a price match policy. A lot of big box retailers, whether we're talking about Target, for those of you who still shop there, shame. Or for like, I don't know, Best Buy, wherever, a lot of stores will price match either a competitor's product or if that product goes on sale within a week or two of your purchase date. So just know that companies have policies in place for customer service. Now they're changing and evolving as things get tighter, but make sure that you use those to your advantage.
Yeah. Now, I will also say, while make sure you check online first sounds like an early 2000s shopping tip, but it's still like ridiculously relevant today. Even when you are shopping online, there's now a bit of a process to that as well. Like we've been trained to not just buy it the first time that you see it. And I can say this specifically as someone who has purchased more baseball gear in the last year than ever before in my life. And so our son is a really good baseball player. And so we're pretty regularly buying like different equipment or training gear or something like that. And what I've certainly learned over the last 2 years or so is like you never buy the actual first price. I know now to go to the website after you hear about something, maybe you visited 1 or 2 times. That's usually enough for the cookies to pick up who you are. The next time you log into Facebook, you're going to see an ad for that thing, right? And if you ignore that ad or maybe click on the ad and then sort of like still continue to ignore it, then the next time you see it, you're going to see maybe a different ad or maybe a coupon code. Hey, let me, you keep checking, but
if you give me your phone number, I'll give you 15% off.
Then it becomes, hey man, you know what? All right, do I got to offer you something? Great. Then you get the phone number, you get the text message, or you can sign up for the email so that they can send you offers. And then you just keep that thing going, right? And then after you purchase, what comes after that is a big thank you. And hey, come on back. Here's another little incentive to keep on shopping with us, right? These are these steps, right? This is a matter of media literacy, internet literacy, digital marketing literacy, and pricing literacy that can actually save you a ton of money. Because otherwise, if you just run into that online store, you will be paying the highest price possible. But if you do a little bit more work, they will give you a reason to make that purchase at a discount and make it a much more affordable thing. Now, the other thing you can do if we're not just shopping online, again, this sounds like an early 2000s tip here, but is to not just look at the sticker price, but to look at the unit price. My first thought always goes to little things like lotion and toothpaste. Where it's always like, oh, now you're getting 20% more, 30% more, or now with this and that. Like just look at the price, look at the ounces or the weight of it. And then next to that, the conversion is usually done for you. That's what you should actually be comparing it to, like ounce for ounce, pound for pound. How much am I actually paying? The amount of that, the size of it, the volume is less relevant. That's the total price that you're going to pay. But if you want to do some price shopping, there's a big, big difference, and it's subtle, and they won't give you the percentage, right? They'll just tell you, well, it's 49 cents per ounce or however many dollars per pound. But that's really what you want to look at. So whether it's meats or, produce or lotion products, all of those things, like it's not just the price. You need to be looking at it and thinking about it the same way you would a nutritional label.
Yes.
Whereas you're not just looking at, the total number of calories. It's actually the calories
sodium,
per the
fat,
serving size.
Sugar.
Right. And it was like, yeah, that's per serving size. And you just had 3 servings of that thing. And so you should not just be looking at that top line number. You really have to do a little bit more math to make a more educated decision.
Yeah. I like the calorie example. That's a great metaphor because you're right. All calories are not created the same and all serving sizes are not created the same. And once you are literate in how both of those things work, you can understand that the serving size of 2 cookies isn't the same as 6 cookies. I love that.
You're going to eat 4 cookies anyway.
I'm hungry.
Ain't no such thing as 2 cookies.
Ain't no such thing as 2 cookies. That ain't nobody's serving size.
Well, is one Oreo with 2 sides? Is that 1 cookie or 2 cookies? That's half a cookie.
You know, this reminds me of the dad from Everybody Hates Chris. You remember how he used to constantly
I never watched the show.
What?
We've had this conversation. I've never watched the show.
Oh, it's Terry Crews's best role.
I've seen it on Better Than White Chicks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way better.
I only saw White Chicks.
Oh my gosh, you have to watch this.
No,
y'all, please harass him in the comments and explain.
The only
what
thing I
he's
know
missing.
about Everybody Hates Chris, and this is the last thing I'll say because we'll talk about it for 20 minutes, is that the actor looked just like me as a kid.
Yes.
It used to be my profile picture.
Yeah.
Actually. That's the only thing I know about it. And that's what made people think that I knew the show. And I had to take it down because I actually don't know the show. I just know that kid looked just like me when I was a kid.
Well, he's notoriously frugal. Like he's the light flipper. He unplugs things. He'll tell you how much each kilowatt of electricity costs.
Oh, in the show?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Like he's notoriously, hilariously frugal. And I get that some of these tips may make people who are familiar with the show feel like that's just doing too much. Like what we talking about? Saving 3 cents, saving 5 cents. And it's like in a world where there are tariffs in the hundreds of percents, it's more than 2 or 3 cents. Like these are different times than before. And while it's not behavior that I would encourage on a regular basis for compulsion or obsession reasons, it is something that I would encourage you to adopt in these times as a temporary measure. You don't have to make it a personality and you don't have to make it about every item, but the things that you know are big budget leaks. You go and see your favorite face moisturizer or toner or shampoo is now 40% more. You might want to start looking at them cents per ounce. You might want to start looking at units versus overall sticker price.
That's real. Okay, let's transition a little bit because we've been talking about tariffs. And at the end of the day, it's just a price increase, right? Which is why we're really talking about pricing and helping people navigate those decisions. We've spoken about it, what you can do as a consumer, but it's bigger than that. I want to also talk about it from a standpoint of investing. And the way that I look at this is a bit of a maturation process that everybody tends to go through. Once you start your personal finance journey and you start to understand saving and budgeting, and then you graduate into understanding investing, at some point you should have a better understanding of business and business concepts because they are all kind of related. Like we've been talking about this almost like a business podcast and talking about, tariffs and global policy and trade and all of those kinds of things. But I mentioned something earlier that I think is really important with respect to tariffs and pricing, and that's pricing power. Pricing power is the ability for a company to raise prices on something and it to have little to no impact on the demand for that product, right? Like they can use that to their advantage to make more money without selling more units of whatever products that they offer.
Or losing customers,
right? Which is what they call market share. And the reason why I bring that up is because you want to be mindful of that, like companies that have that kind of pricing power. We talked about luxury goods, luxury items, right? Like people who know that they are marketing to people who have money tend to have a lot of pricing power because there's a lot of space in between what it costs to create whatever it is that they're creating and what they ultimately start to charge people. So you want to be mindful of that because that's a clear indicator that like something might be significantly more expensive one day versus the next day. But as an investor, that's also something. And in many cases, that's favorable for you because you want to invest in a company that has the ability to do that. Like they can create more profit without taking on more costs. And so the question becomes, well, how do you know that? How can you determine, like, is it subjective? And to a certain extent it is, but they tell you, like they talk about it, they say it all the time. And the language can be a little coded. Again, going back to your understanding of business and understanding the jargon that's oftentimes associated with it. But if you listen to earnings calls or read the annual reports, you don't have to read the whole thing. Maybe it's just like the executive summary.
Child, put it in
the
Chat
highlights.
GPT.
You could also just put it in Chat GPT and ask for references. Like there are little things like that you can kind of decode or understand just by listening to earnings calls and reading some of the reports that they offer. But you'll hear things, or you can search for things like cost pressures or input inflation or, pricing strategy, all these little buzzwords that they use to talk about how they are either responding to to a rise and increase, or it could be a tariff that was placed on them, or their comfort levels with their ability to either absorb those costs or pass it on without it having any impact to market share and or demand. So if you're an investor and you're looking for, let's say, a sector that you might want to overemphasize in, this is typically the reason why a lot of people tend to place greater emphasis on tech sectors or tech stocks, is because tech companies oftentimes have a lot of pricing power. We've been talking about Apple, you know, even Tesla, even though they did not have a great earnings call the other day.
You see, he's going back to work.
Oh,
he's stepping away from his government role.
Oh, good for him.
To spend more time at his fledgling company.
Good for Mr. Musk. But yeah, like this is part of the reason why a lot of people tend to gravitate towards that sector and towards those kinds of companies for individual holdings, because they do tend to have pricing power. So all of that to say, like, these are things that you need to be mindful of, because it's also tech products that can go from being, you think about Netflix, right? It's like same Netflix, but they will raise the price on you every single year. And they prove that point that actually we didn't lose a lot of customers. Why? Because they have a lot of pricing power.
And because they added features that made up for the ones that they lost. Presumably.
But people don't mind because they have pricing power. And as a result, no real decrease in market share until they start giving you bad product, bad movies and shows. And as an investor, you are handsomely rewarded. So again, these are all concepts that are connected. And I think the more you start to understand them and connect those dots, it makes you a better budgeter, it makes you a better consumer, but it should also make you a better investor.
Yeah. If you do this part, if you do the research, you'll be able to see which companies are kind of milking their loyalty versus which ones are quietly failing. And you're right, it's hidden in a bunch of jargon. So you'll hear them say things like, oh, we raised prices modestly and we've seen no significant customer churn, which basically means we were able to turn up the heat a little bit and nobody left us. We lost some people, but not anything statistically significant. Or you might hear we're absorbing the higher input costs to protect share in the short term, which basically means they're eating it. They got charged the tariff. They don't feel comfortable passing it on to their customer. And we're hoping, AKA lobbying in DC, that this is a short-term thing, or we can get an exemption, or we can move our factory to a country that doesn't have as many tariffs.
Now, sometimes they're absorbing the cost because they don't want to associate the rise in cost with any particular product, right? They're absorbing it now and giving you the impression that they're not the kind of company that would pass on a higher price. But what they really are planning on is like next year, hitting you with the mollywop price increase on some new rollout.
Yes.
And they'll try to make it up on the back end and sort of apply that rise in cost to something else and sort of capitalize on this new thing.
Yeah.
And see if they could tuck it in there a little bit. So,
or they just start shrinking the packaging. Like that's what happened last year or the year before that with shrinkflation, where they needed to charge more. So instead of passing on that cost, they just gave you fewer Doritos or less Pepsi or whatever it is. And then the last thing you'll hear is that, you know, tariff impacts have been offset by operational efficiency, which basically means they laid off a bunch of people in order to pay for these tariffs. And so you hear what companies are doing. They're all doing it. They're not telling you straight up. But I think it's just another reminder that we don't live in some sealed off system. I think you mentioned this earlier, but as personal as we think our finances are, they are impacted by all of these outside forces. And part of growing up in your financial literacy is understanding that global view, taking it outside of just your local neighborhood or outside of just your specific individual bank account, and realizing that there's so much that we don't control. And so I do have to read the room. I do have to understand politics and economics to some extent.
Yeah, to a great extent. You know, I think for a lot of people, you know, we benefit and are participating in a global economy far more than we realize. I think we tend to just look at the tags on the backs of shirts and look at the inscriptions on plastic goods and generally say, oh, well, everything's made in China. But yeah, a lot more than you realize is actually made there. And if it's not China, it's other Asian countries. And it's been like that for a really long time. But it's complicated. Like, this is where we are. Like, this globally interconnected economic system that we're a part of has been churning for a really, really long time. And it's not just with goods, it's also with services. Even with us, We were just in Jamaica. We were asked to speak at a conference in the Caribbean, and we had a great time while we were there. But we really quickly realized that like we were the import, right? Like we were asked to come here. We were paid to go. We were asked to speak. We were asked to perform. We were asked to nurture. We were asked to host. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying like there was a price increase and it was a reflection of the fact that we were imported. Like the time of year that we were asked to go, the initial time, which was over a holiday period, like all of those things factored into the quote that we offered. And they were able to meet that. But like, this is sort of the environment that we're in. And so the point of all of that is to say there are times where you may be looking at that interconnectedness and looking at the premium or the heavy discount and benefiting from it. There are times where you are on the losing end of that negotiation and you're having to pay a little bit more. There are also times where you as a citizen or as a business owner in the US are going to benefit from that premium, from that American perspective that other countries and other business people and entrepreneurs don't necessarily have and are looking to you to offer because there is a value and a premium placed on it. And so this is where we are, you know? And so the question isn't so much around just complaining about the system. It's about navigating that system and understanding that system and putting yourself in situations where more often than not, things are working in your favor.
The benefit of that perspective isn't just empowerment, but it gives you range. You're no longer locked into one economy, one job market, one source of goods or opportunity. And when things change, because they always do, you're not stuck. You're not stuck waiting to be rescued or for things to change. You're already in motion and you're already making moves. And so if you can stop thinking about money as just what's in your account or what things cost at the store and start seeing it as movement, as flow, as decisions being made, and as this energy, this movement that's happening all around you, that to me is what financial literacy looks like when it's grown up.
Yeah.
That's what I want to talk about in April going forward. I think people understand basic addition and subtraction. That's not why the budget fails. They understand that they should be saving a percentage. They understand percentages. That's not why there's a retirement crisis.
Right.
It's beyond just how do I make a budget and more so how do I read the world and then move through it on the terms that I'll create for my life.
You know, along those lines, I would say, because I really like your point around what you would want conversations to look like April 2026. But I would say it's the same is true for business. You know, I remember, again, reflecting back on my experience in graduate school. And I remember thinking, even in undergrad, actually, saying that you studied international business was like so sexy and so advanced. And it was like, oh my gosh, not only is this person like understanding business, but they understand the differences between how business is conducted and handled here versus how it may be conducted in another part of the world or other regions. And that was like something that was so unique and needed and like highly specialized. And I remember thinking, man, I really should do that. And only to realize that 20 years later, like having the advantage of speaking another language maybe is beneficial, but there's an app for that. Like no disrespect to anyone who, you know, really like invested heavily in multilinguality, but like there's an app for that. And even kids are using it and they just naturally communicate with people all abroad. And so it's not so much a matter of understanding international business. It's just business now. And there are international components. And the same is true for investing, at least from a lot of people's perspectives. Like you can have a total stock market index fund or a US based index fund, but best believe a significant percentage of the companies that you own are conducting business internationally.
Yes.
And if you want highly specialized perspective, then you can get things like a total world index fund or a total sort of international index fund. But like at the end of the day, it's all interconnected. And so it's a tit for tat, oranges versus tangerines versus Mandarin
versus
situation. It's like, well, what is a cutie? Well, a cutie is just
it's a peelable orange.
GMO, PMO. Yeah, I don't know, but it's all related. And so, you know, this is where we are now. And I think that this is just part of the process. And so hopefully a lot of people can just mature in all ways. I mean, it's tariffs that triggered this conversation, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of what are we going to do about it? And if you don't understand the environment or how things are connected, it's going to be really difficult for you to do that. And so now this kind of forces the issue And, take it or leave it. This is where we are. This is just another example of where we are. You can't have one without the other. And
exactly.
So you want cheap products. You want a pricing premium for the products that you serve. This is part of that process. And it's a learning opportunity and hopefully one that a lot of people can capitalize on.
I hope so, because as much as you talked about business education, a business is just the container for the consistent exchange of money. Mm-hmm. Pricing literacy is at the foundation of that. Like if you want to continue to exchange money, to trade money for either goods or services, then you have to understand pricing literacy and how prices adjust over time and how you find customers to match the price point that you set. And that starts with understanding pricing. It starts with this core part of financial literacy, and it explains why so many businesses don't last past the 5 years. A lot of people assume that it's because, they didn't have customers, or, it's because of a product issue. And sometimes that's it. But a lot of times it's because they failed to understand pricing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, amen. I think we need to do an episode on that, how to price your goods and services.
Oh, good luck with that. Sounds like a great solo topic.
It'd be 11 hours long.
It sure would be.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, then let us know and leave a free rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, or drop a comment below to keep the conversation going. We will see y'all next week.